border of Texas as defined in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo 1848 is midstream of the Rio Grande River. Anytime we move off of that midpoint, we're in essence ceding land back to Mexico, and that's another issue. The Department of Homeland Security is taking property that our forefathers have fought and died for, and now they're coming through district court without giving a citizen his day in court to affront his accuser, to represent his position. My opinion is the Department of Homeland Security is out of control. We have a government within a government, and they are using stormtrooper tactics in acquiring this property. We are trying to fight this to the bitter end. You haven't seen the federal government use eminent domain of this magnitude since President Eisenhower was establishing the federal highway system during his administration. But again, the fight has just begun. We don't think that fences make for good neighbors. We have a wonderful neighbor in Piedras Negras. I'm in Piedras at least once a day. And we have two countries, but we can continue to operate as one community. And it just doesn't, I just don't feel that fence between neighbors, especially one that will only slow down an illegal entry by 3 to 4 minutes, as stated by the head of Border Patrol, David Aguilar, at a cost to the American taxpayer of $49 billion. Not only prudent for the city of Eagle Pass, I don't think it's a prudent expense for the taxpayers of the United States, because it's conveying a false sense of security. One size doesn't fit all. What works in California, Arizona, and New Mexico will not work in Texas. Texas, 95% of the border property is in private hands. It's not, very little of this property is in state or federal parklands. We know where the border is. It's the river. We're advocating more technology, more Border Patrol agents, and let's eradicate the carrizo cane and salt cedar. That facilitates two ends. That facilitates Border Patrol's line of sight to the banks of the river. Carrizo cane is a refuge for any illegal entry. Let's eradicate that. Let's achieve line of sight to the border of the river, and we're losing enough water through transpiration of those two plants to supply the city of Brownsville with water for 4 years. You've seen a 70% decrease in the Del Rio sector, which Eagle Pass is a part of, where we have no physical barriers. At the same period, you've seen a 7% increase in the San Diego sector, where they do have physical barriers. To date, we've found 42 tunnels thus far under physical barriers. But the purpose of detention centers, that's a private initiative, and generates income for the private sector that builds these facilities. This time I think somebody's going to pork $49 billion. I think President Calderon is making tremendous headway. Nobody has given Mexico the credit that they deserve. Those in Mexico that are fighting the drug war, their lives are at jeopardy, their families' lives are at jeopardy, but they continue to fight the narcotraficante, jeopardizing their lives, their families' lives, and their civil liberties within their country. They have to travel in vehicles that are bulletproof. They have to travel with bodyguards, and nobody's given those individuals the credit that they deserve for the fight that they've taken on. Brother, we're criticizing Mexico, and I think we can be a better neighbor to Mexico if we worked with Mexico rather than working at odds with them. I mean, the consumption of those drugs is in the United States. Were it not, it's supply and demand. Were there not the demand, there would not be the supply. That works the same way for any immigrant labor. Were there not the demand, there wouldn't be the supply coming. But a lot of that is relative to a broken immigration system. If we were to have a guest worker system, we would take the yard men and the housekeepers off the river and put them onto the bridges, and then be able to better focus on any illegal activity that's taking place between the ports. Canada, as we speak, is flying to Monterrey and Mexico City, picking up guest workers and flying them back to Canada to do the work that the Canadian citizens will no longer take on. In the United States, where we have a 5% unemployment rate, a 0 fertility rate, the baby boomers, of which I'm one, are the largest working segment of our community, and we're not long for this environment. So who's going to replace us? From an educational standpoint, nobody in the United States aspires or educates their children to become housekeepers, or yard men. We have higher aspirations for our children. Who's going to do those jobs? I go to a conference in Washington. The Department of Homeland Security is there, and the people serving them their coffee are illegal immigrants. I'm a freak about asking de donde vienes, and they're being served. You want to clean up immigration, let's start within the Beltway.
Do you feel that the federal government is taking local opinion seriously?
They haven't even looked our way. They'll have a town hall meeting with a preconceived agenda. They're focused on building a fence. The Texas Border Coalition is focused on securing the borders of Texas. We've been in the security business since the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Security is a priority of the Texas Border Coalition. Our issue is if we only have one chance to secure our border with $49 billion, we want to be sure we get it right the first time. In this technical age, when you can send a smart bomb down a stovepipe, surely we can use technology rather than physical barriers to secure our state where we have a natural historic resource, the Rio Grande River. Maverick County has historically had a large segment of our community has been migratory farm laborers, but due to them having higher aspirations for their children, that segment of our community is shrinking because their children have achieved higher education. Their children are back in the community as teachers and lawyers. On 4,000 miles of northern border, you have a little over 1,000 Border Patrol agents. Conversely, on the southern border, 2,100 miles, we have over 13,000 Border Patrol agents. If I'm a terrorist, my philosophy, the terrorists are already here, but if I'm coming into the country, I would come through Canada, which is much more liberal. The border's much more porous. In the history of the world, you've never seen a terrorist come out of the southern border. The residents of the border communities along the Texas border are very cohesive. We have a very unique and wonderful life, and we were doing well until Washington got their finger into our pie. Rob, first I take issue with Washington responding. Washington is just mulling the issue and trying to push it over to the next administration. There's been a definite premeditated false sense of the reality of the Texas border conveyed to the residents of the interior of the U.S. It is the basis of existence. I mean, it's the basic of our culture, religion, and family, or the cornerstones of our culture. We operate as the same community, even though we live in two different countries. Again, I go to Piedras Negras. I was there last night for an event. I know the governor of Coahuila much better than I know the governor of Texas. I grew up along the banks of the Rio Grande. It is the greatest natural resource that the state of Texas has, and it's one of the 7 most endangered rivers in the world. And I think we should be working on rehabilitating the Rio Grande than doing something to negatively impact it. Our mayors of border communities, none of us have any political aspiration. What we have in common is we're all very, very passionate about our communities and our unique way of life. If we continue on the course on the borders that the terrorists are winning, they're destroying our way of life. They're destroying our economy. We're putting roadblocks against the flow of trade and tourism between both Mexico and Canada, and we take issue with that. Once they've done that without having fired a shot, they're winning the battle. We need more coverage of the reality of the Texas border. The Texas border, the border is not generic. Texas is unique, but even within the Texas border, there are unique areas. But the border of Texas is unique unto any other border state, and that we have more population, we have more relationships with our border communities on both sides of the river. So we're very proud of those relationships and have worked generations to develop those relationships. Well, I called David Real because David was on council for 14 years, former Brown Panther member, and I called David 3 weeks ago to get the brown beret out. David, because we're about ready to march.